Hello and welcome to the Chicago Humanities Festival and today's program, The Future of Independent Film in Chicago. My name is Kwame Amoku and I'm the director of the Chicago Film Office for the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, and it's my pleasure to introduce this program. We'll be joined today by two Chicago filmmakers, Kris Rey and Jennifer Reeder, for a conversation on filmmaking past and present, moderated by Chicago Humanities Marilynn Thoma Artistic Director Alison Cuddy. This week of programming is presented with support of WTTW. You can learn more about upcoming events at thechicagohumanities.org and help support them by donating or becoming a member. Thanks to our captioner for making this event more accessible. All digital events have closed captioning, which can be controlled through YouTube. Please join me in welcoming Kris Rey, Jennifer Reeder, and Alison Cuddy.
Thank you, Kwame, so much for that introduction. And Jennifer and Kris, it is so great to be here with both of you. I am a fan of your work, and I'm really excited to be talking to you about it and about what the hell is going on with filmmaking in Chicago in general. So thank you both for being here.
Oh my God, thanks for having us.
Here. Yep.
Before we get into sort of what's been happening in terms of your projects and looking forward to what you're working on, I just wanted to ask, I mean, Chicago is one of those places where it can feel like everyone you meet is already connected to you in some way, and yet there are circles and circles and circles that you may never penetrate. You know, it's got that small town, but it's so far flung. And so I'm curious, are you two connected to each other? Were you familiar with each other's work? What's your relationship like? Jennifer, why don't you start us off?
Well, I can tell you that the last time that I saw Kris, we had drinks in Pilsen the day before South by announced that they were canceling the festival. Yeah. And, you know, I remember, you know, Kris was super excited to premiere her new film. And then she was like, I mean, but what if they cancel? And I was like, that's ridiculous. They're not going to cancel South by. And then literally 24 hours later, maybe less than that, South by was canceled. So anyway, that's the last time that I saw Kris, who, and we've become friends. I mean, I think that there's that, you know, that we have through other productions sort of shared, there's like more like a Venn diagram of kind of behind the camera people, it seemed like. And then I feel like we actually finally met, or I mean, I knew of Kris, and then we finally met because we both had, I think, short films through the Midwest Independent Film Festival.
Oh yeah,
a long time ago. And
didn't we ran into each other? You like ran up to me outside or something like that?
Yeah,
maybe I ran up to you, I don't remember, and we were like, we should know each other.
Yes, yeah. And I think you were pregnant with Abby, right? Yeah. And so and you were very pregnant, so I feel like then it was like we should know each other better. But then I know, you know, having 3 children myself, I know that, you know, new babies take up time. And so it took us a while to kind of, you know, to reconnect. But yeah, I mean, maybe there's not maybe a very exciting, you know, smash together.
But I do feel like I did always get the sense like we should be like, and I hope the entire time is just about Jennifer and I's relationship. Is this like a couple counseling session? I did always feel like we should know each other more, and there should be more opportunities for us to. I've always felt since I've moved to Chicago in 2003 that I was like, why isn't there a tighter community? And I never know if there's not a tighter community, or if that I'm just like not a part of a tight community that exists. But it's crazy. Like we're both there's not that many independent film directors that are like working and making stuff in Chicago. Why aren't there more opportunities for us to like be forced to hang out, really? But it's tough as a director because you have your own little universe of like your crew and your people, and you're making stuff, and like there's not any real reason that you would need to work with other directors.
Right. So then you just have to contact each other on the off hours and say, let's go have some drinks.
Let's go have some drinks, yeah.
Right. You're both parents, and so then that gets complicated as well, I imagine.
Yeah.
No, it's true. Yeah. I think you sort of prioritize maybe back and forth, sort of like your parent life and your filmmaking life, and then you sneak in a social life after that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I thought about, like, on the surface, and especially if people are new to your work, the tone of these latest films, I Used to Go There and Knives and Skin, Kris and Jennifer's respectively, are very different. The style of them is very different. The connection to realism, I suppose, is very different. And yet, at their core and across your work, I feel like there's so many connections between the work you're doing. One is, we were just talking about you being parents, that kind of focus on women as friends, women as teenagers, women as mothers, women in all of their different complexity, as artists, as creatives. There's also this, most recently, and I wanted to ask you about this maybe a little bit later, that these films are firmly planted in the Midwest. I mean, Kris, I know you filmed in Chicago, and Jennifer, was Knives and Skin made in Lamont, Illinois? Is that where?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Lamont was the exterior, and then we had some houses in Jefferson Park, and we shot at Taft High School, which is on the north side. But so we shot it in and around Chicago, but it really is just supposed to be a sort of an unknown Midwestern town.
We also shot in Lamont a little bit.
Oh my God, it's such a good weird place. That must have been Quinn that led you down there, maybe not.
It was.
Yeah.
Who is Quinn? Is this like a film scouter?
I think that well, Quinn was sort of our production manager for Knives and Skin. I don't know if maybe Quinn had that sort of same role.
I think he was the assistant production office coordinator. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of those resonances, and maybe just talking about the Midwest and making films set in, small town, Midwestern Americana. I know as I said, Kris, you shot in Chicago, but Carbondale, you did some exteriors there, and it's a small college town where the film is set, and that's very central to the whole narrative. Why, in this moment, and why more generally, are you drawn to this kind of place as a space for your films and the interest you have in making them?
It's just
convenience.
Yes, it is convenience, but I don't want to just say it's convenience. It's not just that. It's that I am often making films that are personal to me and sometimes semi-autobiographical, oftentimes semi-autobiographical. And in the instance of I Used to Go Here, it's written about my alma mater, which is Southern Illinois University. And I did think about fictionalizing the place to be a totally different city, but then I thought there's a pride, I have a pride of living here and I have a pride about going to school in Carbondale, and I love those places, and I feel like they're so much of the story, that I like the specificity of it, and I think it's I wanted to kind of represent it in a way. And it is a specific thing living here, especially being in the film industry, spending so much time in Los Angeles. It's a very different vibe. And I like the vibe. It does feel so much, it just feels so grounded here. And people live here on purpose in a way, and they're from here, and they're the stories that I've been telling, and I do have something that I'm writing that takes place in LA, and it's just the stories I'm telling. I often want to tell them in the place that I love, in Chicago. Yeah.
Jennifer?
Well, I mean, I grew up in Ohio, and then I came to Chicago for grad school. I sort of never made it very far. And I also feel just completely and happily Midwestern. I mean, I write about my films from the very first film I ever made, feeling grounded in a Midwestern sensibility, which I think, sort of like you were saying in this just previous question, exists absolutely in both of our work. You know, even though there's absolutely a very different approach to the visuals or to the storytelling, to dialogue, to the characters, etc. But I think that for both Kris and I, our films feel very Midwestern, and even though they're being so different in that regard, I feel like that's also really Midwestern, right? I just grew up in a, you know, when I was growing up, like I just did everything that I could to kind of carve a path out of Central Ohio. And then once I got out of Central Ohio, every single film that I've written is a path back to Central Ohio, you know? And I have, I mean, even though I've lived in Chicago longer than I ever lived in Ohio, I've never written a scene that's supposed to take place on the train. There are some scenes of the skyline in Signature Move, but that was not necessarily my choice, even though or Signature Move is a very Chicago city. I was much more interested in talking about Little Village and you know, Rogers Park as cultural neighborhoods, you know, that feel very, you know, very iconically Chicago, but, you know, outside of the other, you know, iconic landmarks. And you know, so what's kind of evolved with even the shorts that I continue to make. I mean, I've shot, with the exception of only a few things, I've shot stuff in and around Chicago, you know, so it's not like I've gone back to Ohio to shoot anything. And really, it's sort of like one big, you know, it is sort of like one big, you know, heart-shaped region. And I just think that, you know, I usually start writing a script based on characters. And I just find there's something that's like really both, I mean, Kwame said it, right? It's kind of like salt of the earth, this kind of like salty groundedness, a realness, you know, lack of irony, just a kind of sincerity, whether it's both in sort of enthusiastic joy or a kind of, you know, stubborn, you know, a stubbornness. And I find the literally the flatness of the landscape also to be really remarkable. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, people who have grown up on either coast or have like migrated to either coast, right? I mean, they sort of like to imagine that everything besides those, you know, in between the coast, which of course is like everything, is unremarkable and boring. And I actually find even those terms, unremarkable or boring, have lots of agency. You know, I mean, there's something about even my films that are sort of like, it's so boring that it's magical. Actually, it's so flat and so unremarkable that it is the portal to the fourth dimension.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a vibe in both your films where, you know, literally there are magical things happening in your film, Jennifer, things that aren't explained by reality as we know it. But even in, I used to go there, the idea of just sort of wandering and like letting things unfold, which is so much a part of living in a college town or living in a small city or a small place where you know, like, and things happen that are not, you can't necessarily anticipate. I don't know, there was just something about that in your film, Kris, that I thought was really special, like that, I don't know, it's like The Drift or something like that, yeah. You know, that a Midwesterner could understand. But out of that can come some kind of meaningful connections or moments or observations.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Does this resonate outside of here? I was teasing because, you know, is it just convenient that you're filming in your backyard, so to speak? But, you know, it's not convenient, I imagine, in many ways to not be near those like empires of production, right? New York or LA. Although I want to talk about how that might be changing with the pandemic, this ongoing situation we're in. But does the kind of authenticity you're talking about, the sense of place, does that resonate? I mean, obviously you're doing well with your film, so it must on some level, but do you have to sell it, or do people get it, or is there a yearning for that? What's the status of like the world that you're bringing?
I think it's, I mean, we're also like, we are living in a world where nothing is necessarily shot any particular place like it used to be. It's no longer that every movie's filmed in Hollywood. Often, you know, my friends that are directors that live in LA are not making, we'll go years without actually shooting anything in LA. They're shooting in literally whatever city has the best tax credit.
Yeah.
And so they're shooting in Vancouver, they're shooting in Atlanta, they're shooting in Louisiana for a while there. And Chicago luckily has the incentive, the tax incentive, or else I think it would be very difficult for me to convince financiers to allow me to shoot here. When I was making smaller stuff, I didn't have to convince anyone to let me do anything. But now, you know, it's a big difference to $1 million, and getting 30% back on that is enough to convince someone that I want to shoot in Chicago. It's set in Chicago, I want to shoot in Chicago. But even with, you know, some early conversations, even with I used to go here, we're talking about, okay, maybe we do have to shoot this in Georgia. Maybe we do have to shoot this elsewhere because, you know, the weather and because of the money. So I for now, I think from what I've been doing, it's been easy to do because of that. And then in terms of like what people want to see, I think it's cool. I think people are like, it's not something you see all the time. I think Chicago, you know, we do have this like great history with the John Hughes movies and Blues Brothers and stuff like that, where it's not crazy. It's not like we're living in, you know, I don't know, Cleveland or something. No offense to people who live in Cleveland, but you know, it's like Chicago does have its history of being a city that people watch movies take place in. So I don't know. I like the specificity of place when I, as an audience member, as like a film viewer. So I've never felt any pushback on it.
Yeah, and for me, I would say two things. I mean, for both Signature Move and Knives and Skin, I mean, the producers were here in Chicago and they wanted to make a film in Chicago. You know, I mean, that was also part of their incentive. So at some point, I mean, and Signature Move was very much, you know, set here with the city as that backdrop. And Knives and Skin, there was a time when there was a producer involved who wanted to shoot it in Louisville, and then there was another, you know, organization that was thinking about shooting it in Ohio. And then when Brian and Jan of New City Film said, like, well, we'll help you, you know, producers will help you finance it, or we'll finance it rather, if you want to shoot it in Chicago. And yeah, so then it just took, you know, almost, you know, no time at all working with the city's film office and the, you know, the state's film office to find locations that made it seem, you know, that the setting was not, you know, just outside of, you know, the third largest city in the country. And then Knives and Skin premiered at you know, the Berlin Film Festival, you know, which has always embraced my films and so, you know, I think that to have a very Midwestern film launch out of, you know, a very European city and a very European festival, you know, also says that, it does translate, you know, that the sort of, that the story translates. And I just find so often that when I'm traveling, like outside of the country, not so much like within the US, but outside of the country, like there's always a kind of a, you know, like every place has a kind of Midwestern region, you know, every country, it feels like it has a kind of Midwestern region. Every country has a small town with, you know, a bunch of sort of, I wouldn't say, you know, only eccentric people, but people who have chosen to live outside of outside of the cities, which is the big cities rather, which is particular. And, you know, so my films are also not necessarily, I mean, even though I've been shooting only in Chicago for the most part, mine are actually a little bit more removed from the, you know, from the city itself. Although the film that I'm sort of in this, you know, whatever pre-production means right this minute for right now is set in a city. Right now, we're not sure what that city will be. It could be Chicago. It could be someplace else that is sort of more convenient in terms of just, you know, dealing with post-pandemic production. Yeah, I mean, I think that if you do it right, which I feel like, I mean, it's a bold statement, but I feel like Kris and I are doing it right, you know, then your message, you know, does translate outside of what could otherwise feel like something regional. And I think that God, it's like I'm sure that both of us have just watched the landscape of film and television production just transform pretty radically in the past, you know, 11 or 12 years, right? When the sort of like Dick Wolf empire, you know, kind of moved in. What is happening now is that you have, you know, what I think wasn't happening, you know, maybe even just 10 years ago, you know, the kids who are graduating from the film schools here in Chicago are staying here. And you know, there's more than just one, you know, catering company who knows how to cater a film set. And there's, you know, multiple rental houses, and there, you know, people who there's always been an incredible talent pool, you know, that through the theater community. But infrastructurally, you know, it's no longer that you can either just make a sort of a indie low budget film that feels like it's adjacent to sort of, you know, the student film, or it's this like gigantic budget film or television production where all the creative heads are brought in from out of town. You know, you can make these other films that are in a mid range in terms of the budgets, and everybody who you need, you know, for the most part is here, or at least, you know, for both Signature Move and Knives and Skin, you know, we cast it both in front of the camera. You know, it was all a Chicago based casting crew. On Signature Move, with the exception of Shabana Asmi, who we brought in from the superstar that we brought in from Mumbai. But, you know, I think that if you want to make a film here at you know, at a very varying budget ranges, you know, you've got the people here who can help you, you know, realize that.
You mentioned like whatever post-production or pre-production or production looks like right now. And I wanted to have you both talk a little bit about what that is looking like. We started the conversation that the last time you met was just 24 hours the day before they canceled South by Southwest. And I want to talk about festivals because I know those have been such important circuits, and that complicates too the kind of idea of what being an independent filmmaker in one location actually looks like. But how are you working right now, and how is that complicated or not, or made easier by being based in Chicago, regardless of what the productions you're working on? So maybe Kris, could you give us sort of the lay of the land? What are you doing right now? And what is that looking like in this moment?
Right. Right now, all I'm doing is writing. That's not true. I'm doing writing and I'm doing meetings. I'm doing lots of meetings. And typically the rhythm of what would happen to me, I just released my film last month. What's today? Yeah, less than a month ago, my film was, over a month ago, my film was released. And what would normally happen in the before times is that the movie would have come out and I would have gone on a massive tour of film festivals, screenings at universities, like different, like a theatrical premiere, a press day. I would have been just like flying all over the country doing all this stuff, which I really like miss. I love doing that. And then I would have also spent a couple of weeks in LA doing meetings. And the meetings would have looked like me going to these different production companies and studios and networks and saying like, hey, I'm Kris Rey, I just made this movie. They would have watched the movie probably at my agency's theater. And then they would have said, here's what we're working on. We're looking for directors and writers. And I would have said, here's what I'm working on. And then we would have had, this little meeting. And then I would have done that 5 times a day for like 2 weeks. And what is happening now is that I'm doing all of that virtually. So I've been like attending all of these like film festivals and like doing Q&As, like virtual Q&As. And then I'm like doing all of these general meetings with the same kind of people in Los Angeles, except everyone is on Zoom in their living rooms or bedrooms or whatever. And because we're in a pandemic right now, everyone is doing that. And I'm not at any kind of disadvantage for living in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And most people that I'm talking to assume that I'm in Los Angeles somewhere in my living room, not in Chicago in my living room. It's like anytime they're like, what are you up to? I'm like, well, I live in Chicago. And they're like, whoa. And it doesn't matter where I live because everyone's in the same boat. Whereas it used to before, it used to like, I don't want to say a disadvantage as a director who's like typically creating my own content. It's always been okay for me thus far to live in Chicago, to write my work in Chicago, to shoot in Chicago. And then I have to go to LA to do casting and to like do meetings. And I did my post-production in LA and I did some other work in New York this year. But for the most part, it's been fine. And I think right now it's like even more fine. So all of that seems to be okay, less fun, but also less expensive.
Yeah. Jennifer, your film Knives and Skin came out or started being released at the end of 2019. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? But were you, filmmaking is a funny business, and sort of when things are being distributed or released or what that, as Kris just laid out, what that looks like. I mean, did the onset of the pandemic or anything else, did that affect what was going to be happening with Knives and Skin this year, or how are you navigating this right now?
No, I mean, it literally had the kind of tail end of the theatrical releases happened in February, maybe like early in March, like somehow it had just finished its theatrical run, when the world shut down. It just had a screening in Portland at a drive-in theater, which was pretty cool. I mean, that happened maybe a couple of weeks ago or something. And it was curated by, it was the script went through Independent Film Week through IFP. So it was like an IFP project, and Amy Dotson, who was formerly with IFP, was curating this program out in Portland. So I think it was a bunch of different, I think they were showing Labyrinth. I mean, it was not so much like new releases, but that was cool. But no, it was all sort of a done deal by the time that all this happened. And, I mean, right now Kris described exactly, these sort of general meetings, there's, I don't have one today, but, last week it was sort of like every day, there were a couple happening every day. And it's the exact same thing. They're like, so anyway, are you in New York or LA? And I'm always like, I'm in Chicago. But I felt like I could tell them I'm any place, right? I mean, I should start being a little bit more creative because I could say like, well, I have a treehouse in Topanga Canyon, whatever. I could say anything. And, or, I could say I'm in Paris. I don't know. I could say all sorts of things, but I keep just saying, and I actually live just outside the city. I mean, and the reality is that I live in the northwest tip of Indiana, so actually maybe that does seem kind of, exotic. They're like, Indiana, am I pronouncing that correctly? I mean, it is part of the Chicagoland area, like, let's be real. the, you know, I actually kind of love that these meetings don't require travel, you know, anymore. I totally hear, Kris, that like the most fun part about releasing a film, and especially one that is like going to have like good festival traction, is going to the festivals and like interacting with audiences who are just dying for that content. Those Q&As are so fun.
Yeah.
The general meetings, if you're there in person, you know, like at New York or LA, either one. I mean, it's just like you spend so much time sort of getting to the meetings, and you're there for 20 minutes, and it's a little bit of kind of like, here's who we are, who, you know, here's who I am, and here's who you are, and trying to figure out, like, you know, do you want to have another conversation later on down the road? And I sort of love that there's this other buffer of Zoom that is, I don't know, I just appreciate that I'm not traveling for those general meetings, right? And just last week, actually a week ago today, Emily Best, who's one of the, you know, founders and the directors of Seed and Spark, passed through town.
What is Seed and Spark?
So it's like a crowdfunding organization for female directors that has been based in LA. But she and her husband and her 2 children, you know, who were living in downtown LA during this whole past 6 months, I mean, she realized, like, actually I can run Seed and Spark anywhere. And I want to leave Southern California, you know, for a little while. So they were driving across the country to spend some time, kind of in a treehouse outside, you know, like 2 hours outside of New York, you know? And it's like that. I mean, and I'm sure that Kris will say this too, that some of the general meetings I've had are with people who are based in LA or New York, but have been quarantining in Houston, in Savannah, and someplace else, who are also kind of loving being out of the fray of those 2 cities, and realizing also, you know, that they can still develop films and maintain contact with directors, and, you know, and just have a different kind of life outside of those 2 cities. So I think that the landscape of where people exist as you know, filmmakers or film producers, et cetera, has shifted. And I'm sort of hoping that it doesn't, you know, go back to, you know, to how it was before. But it's I don't know, it's in a way like really validating, because I've so stubbornly stayed in the, you know, in the Midwest. I mean, I have 3 children who are all in school. I'm the sort of sole, you know, financial provider for my whole family. So I'm also not in a position to just on a whim kind of like uproot and move to a city that I honestly can't afford to live in with my children, or I'm not going to uproot them, you know, while they're in school. You know, and I wasn't going to do it before, but now especially it's like, yeah, I'm good. You know, like I can do this from anywhere, and I will, you know, I will continue to do that.
Well, you both were talking earlier about the way the infrastructure has been developing in Chicago, you know, over time. And so there's more support here to make films, like just logistical support even. But are you hearing from many of your peers that, yeah, like maybe Chicago's looking good because people don't want to be in LA or New York for a variety of reasons, or, you know, that sense of, or even people encountering the city through your films and the way you're working, the actors here, that people are starting to think about a place like Chicago that could be a base of operations. You know, are you helping, like, you know, boost the city? You were both talking about being boosted.
I don't know. I'm like a little, I haven't, you know, Jennifer, you were saying film students are staying, and I haven't seen that so much. Like I teach at Northwestern every other quarter or something like that. And I'm always like, my biggest thing that I'm trying to deliver to them is that they can stay in Chicago and make work. And I'm like constantly bringing people in that live and work in Chicago, that like do it, and that like they do not have to move to LA and get an internship at an agency. Like they can, if you want to be an independent filmmaker, you can stay here. And it's actually like I really do believe it's a great place to start out making movies, because it is so filmmaker friendly and sort of like it's just like a chill place. You can just shoot on the street and no one will come by and arrest you. And you can walk by the corner store and say like, hey, do you mind if I shoot here for the day? And usually they're just like excited, not trying to like get as much money out of you as possible. No one's jaded by filmmaking here. But I don't see them doing it as much as I want them to. I do see them leaving, and it does feel, besides like the Dick Wolf of it all, it does feel a little tenuous. And there was like, I don't know, it was like a couple years ago, Jennifer, when like the film, like when the incentive like went away for a little bit, or like was frozen or whatever, and everyone kind of like freaked out, and it like, and you sort of like, if that sticks around, you get the impression that Hollywood's going to keep being okay making movies here. But if it goes away, it's sort of like, that's over. Like it's literally just the money. The weather here sucks, as everyone knows, and it's limited how often you get, like, unless you want to shoot something and deal with the unpredictability, or if you're shooting on a stage. But my film, I used to go here, which takes place in like late spring, early summer. We had to wait we almost shot the summer prior. We just couldn't get it together in time in terms of like financing. And then we had to wait an entire calendar year to give it another go because of the weather. And that isn't the case everywhere. It's a lot more predictable other places. So I do think it is like, there are great crews here. There is a lot of talent here. We do have great rental houses. It is a good vibe, but I don't think it's going to become the next whatever, just because of those factors.
Jennifer, I want to hear from you, but I want to mix it up a little bit, because this is the second time you talked about the tax incentives and how that drives where filmmaking is happening and how that keeps shifting. And we've heard a lot about that. I mean, have either of you, from the vantage point of an independent director position, thought about, not that you have to, but ways to make this more sustainable, and other kinds of, like, what could a city or a state be doing to try and build up filmmaking here beyond the tax incentive? Because that the problem with that is it's just sort of a race to the bottom, right? Everyone just keeps like creating a better incentive, and then the filmmaking moves there, and then it keeps moving around. It's very opportunistic.
I mean, I do think part of it is like, the more films that get made here, the more films will get made here.
A little bit of that, yeah, I do.
Yeah,
but then I look at towns like Austin, and which has the Austin Film Society, which offers a lot of grants and screenings and community building events and opportunities for filmmakers in that way. And that throughout its history, and I think it's been around for years and years and years. I believe it was started co-founded by Richard Linklater. Has maintained also a very cool sort of like a finger on the pulse kind of like aura around it that has made it remain very relevant. And also, and that there's a very strong community in Austin, and San Francisco has a similar vibe. San Francisco has a San Francisco Film Society, which also offers a lot of grants, has a lot of residency programs, and tries to bring talent to San Francisco and cultivate the talent that already exists in San Francisco. And we have all of these we have a lot of organizations in Chicago, and some of them I think are like doing incredible work. It is, for some reason, we just like haven't gotten the thing that does the same thing as those other cities. And I don't know what it's missing. I think it's a combination of money and coolness. What's another word for being cool? I don't know. It's like they're just like, they're like, if we had a system that, and I don't know that it has to be something that the state or city would provide money to, or if it's something private equity, but like if we had a similar system that those other organizations had, where there was one organization that was sort of doing it all, that was like doing cool screenings, like bringing in people for retrospectives, like creating like cool events, and also had all of these grants for local filmmakers, that was encouraging these people. We have all these great film schools here. We have like so many talented kids that are graduating at you know, their mid-20s, that have ideas and that are doing really cool stuff, and that like have a difficult time staying in Chicago because there's not the money here to fund what they want to make. And
it's so interesting though, because you're talking about, and I want to hear from you, Jennifer, you're both about building a film culture here. Like as you're saying, Chicago's given rise to great filmmakers. It's a great city to watch on film. There's kind of a sense of understanding the city through film, but what's lacking maybe is a deeper film culture that people can feel like they're part of, that is not, yes, it's about production and funding on infrastructure, but it's also about like a community that you can engage with, or you can draw people to come talk to you and kind of build that, like that, just that sort of socialness that you need in order to build it. Would you agree with that, Jennifer?
Yeah, and I think that just like Kris said, you know, there's a lot of like little organizations that are entirely nonprofit, that are run by volunteers, that don't have you know, sort of like funding coming in even to sort of support that the organization itself. And so some of them collapse, some of them you know, sort of, you know, team up, and you know, I agree. It's like there's not, you know, there's got to be a way to sustain those organizations. I think partially through you know, funding to get that its own kind of infrastructure solidly moving forward, but they have to have a dedicated full-time staff. You know, I mean, that doesn't have to be 10 people. I mean, the San Francisco Film Society, I got a grant from there a couple of years ago, and they have like, you know, 2 full-time staff people, you know, who also are peripherally involved with some of the film festival stuff, but it's not a huge staff, but it is. And they have a designated, you know, office, and they have, this grants program, which is outstanding. And, you know, so I think that part of that is, that's what is missing. I actually think that even though there are filmmakers here, there are DPs here, what I feel like is missing are producers who are here. So for instance, like I was contacted recently by Neil Edelstein, who produced Mulholland Drive and Straight Story, and I think like The Ring, The Purge. It was a scary movie. I have to look it up. But he recently moved back from LA to sort of like with his wife and his 2 kids, just to you know, to sort of like try to build something larger in Chicago, where it is a destination for, you know, other filmmakers to come and make films, and also an incentive to keep filmmakers here. I mean, he's a totally connected person, but really wants to make Chicago a more robust hub. You know, I mean, Kris mentioned at the top of this conversation, you know, places like Vancouver, places, you know, like Atlanta, I mean, Toronto, Winnipeg. I mean, Philadelphia, that's like M. Night Shyamalan's got this whole thing happening just outside of Philly, you know? I mean, kind of in a way that what like Tyler Perry, for better or for worse, has done in like building that huge studio in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And yeah, CineSpace exists, but that's also a little bit of a closed universe, and it's a TV universe, and it's a real specific kind of TV universe. I mean, again, Alison, I think at the beginning of this conversation, you were like, what do you feel not a part of? I mean, I for sure do not feel part of the, you know, Dick Wolf universe. And I'm not saying like that, geez, I wish I was part of that universe, but it is it's a big footprint in television production here in Chicago, and it's a real bubble, you know, and even the other, you know, some of the other shows, the Netflix and Amazon shows, et cetera, that were, you know, that have happened in Chicago, a lot of those, the sort of prime, you know, the key creative heads are being brought in from out of town too. So I do think that, like, I really don't think I want to direct Chicago PD, but I'm like, no one has ever, you know,
although
no one's ever asked anybody.
Yeah, if both of you would, you know, because you bring so much new and interesting to genre. If you both went into the crime, you know, police, maybe not police. I could imagine you'd both do something really interesting with it. And also, thank you, Jennifer, for shouting out Winnipeg, my hometown, which I do think really has.
I mean, I'll tell you something. Winnipeg is, I mean, this new film that I'm in, again, this kind of what feels like a sort of sometimes, some days fake pre-production. We're not discounting Winnipeg, so I might need some pointers if that becomes true.
For you, I got you. We got a couple questions from folks, and I want to get to those before we wrap up, and then I have a couple more questions. So we've been talking a lot about like the challenges and opportunities of working outside of a place like LA. Or working kind of between here in LA. And we got a question, how do you balance your relationship with collaborators in LA, particularly investors and producers, while living in Chicago? And I would just extend that beyond LA too, because I know, like Jennifer, you've worked with in Germany, you know, so how do you navigate, like particularly the collaborative dimension of the relationship when you're working across big distances or between different places?
Well, I think it's, I mean, sort of like what we talked about before. I mean, previously, right, you would travel, you would go and, you know, you would go and sit down face to face with, you know, whether it was the people who were doing the, you know, the kind of packaging, or, you know, I would go and, you know, have a physical meeting with my agent or my manager. They're on either coasts. And now, for instance, in this film that I'm trying to figure out when we're going to shoot it. I mean, there's one of the producers is actually in Paris, and then there's somebody in New York and there's a bunch of people in LA and somebody in New York. I mean, what's sort of only difficult right now is kind of coordinating the time zones. So when we do like a call, we're coordinating a lot of time zones, but you know, what we've been able to do again over Zoom is like we've attached cast. We are, you know, attempting to attach crew. I mean, attempting meaning that, you know, a lot of people's schedules are, you know, they have a schedule and they don't have a schedule, you know, just, and that's based on sort of like pandemic issues. But I actually love that I can do all of it from my couch, as opposed to, you know, having lots of flights, you know, back and forth, with, you know, maybe returning home with tentative answers, you know, or maybe no answers. You know, now it's like there's still tentative answers, or kind of like, well, let's see what happens in the next 24 hours. But I'm not, you know, there's something about the quality of my life that has remained much kind of calmer and better for my own sort of brain and creativity, and better for my parenting, et cetera, you know, that I'm not sort of just kind of circling the country. Mm-hmm. So again, I think that this could be, you know, that now that we sort of know how to do it, I feel like I don't know what it's going to take to get me sort of in that flight pattern again after this.
Well, shooting probably, right?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, part of like what is thinking about the location right now is that, you know, when I wanted to, the film originally was set in New Orleans. It's kind of a Gothic story, and I wanted to sort of take advantage of the kind of magic that New Orleans can hold. I mean, of course, you know, I feel there is some, it feels sort of problematic, the whole of the heartbeat state aspect of Louisiana, you know, like, just, is that something that you want to necessarily lean into? Although there's, you know, I don't know. I mean, what we're sort of dealing with right now is kind of what was mentioned earlier, that people who were the crews who were in New Orleans have left to quarantine someplace else, and maybe they're not going to return, you know? So one of the things, for instance, that came up with the DP that I was talking to, who's Toronto based, was like, yeah, Winnipeg's got it down. And he was telling me that Winnipeg, maybe you will know this, you should know this, I would suppose, is also a kind of haunted city, that it's got some really interesting, also, that it's got some goth tendencies also. So, that feels appealing. But we might end up back here, in Chicago, but I think that post-pandemic, we're also looking at like, where are the not hot spots, and are we, are we going to be shooting, like, how can I revise this script without diminishing any of the vital narrative to make it easier to shoot on a stage, in a much more kind of a closed shooting situation, or can I consolidate some of the characters so there's like 2 less people on set, etc. I mean, those are the things that I think we'll be thinking about for a long time. And I think we'll be thinking about distribution, for a long time. Like, what does it look like? Are we, what do film festivals look like, in the future? What does a theatrical release look like in the future? What sorts of things can be made knowing that it really will go straight to VOD, and that content is, and right now audiences, that's all people have been doing, right? Like, while they're locked up, is consuming content.
Well, Kris, you probably have some pretty strong answers to that, given that your film is going straight to VOD. But yeah, and you were saying your next film is set, or the one you're writing is set in LA, or your next?
I have one project that I am writing that takes place in LA. I have another one that takes place in Chicago. But I was really freaked out when South by Southwest got canceled. I was really worried that the movie would get lost. And it did not have the premiere that I thought it was going to. I still have not seen it in a theater full of people. And it's a comedy, so that would have been really cool. But man, it's had a hell of a life on VOD, and I didn't anticipate that either. I mean, normally I think it would have been released theatrically, and it would have played festivals, and I would have gotten a real like personal just like high from like attending these theaters and like hearing people laugh and stuff, and then would have gone on VOD and sort of floated away, and I would have had no kind of idea about like what had happened. But instead, I think everybody watched it. It's like no one has anything else to do, and no movies are being released. So this movie came out August 9th, and everyone I know saw it, because it's just like everyone was just happened to be starving for new material, and all of the studios had held their films, so nothing new had been coming out. So it was obviously totally coincidental, but the timing, I think, worked in such a way that I got a lot of great press, because I mean, I don't want to discount how good the movie is. I'm very proud of the movie, but I also want to acknowledge the fact that like they didn't have much else to write about, because there weren't a lot of other films coming out. So I got a lot of great press. I got a lot of good reviews, and I had a lot of people download this movie on iTunes and watch it.
Yeah, it's, opportunities, challenges.
But that was like total luck of the draw.
Yeah.
A year from now, if you're releasing your movie on VOD and that's all that's available because we're still in a tight spot, there's going to be a cacophony of other films that are being released on VOD at the same time. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but I do feel like people like watching stuff. Movies aren't going to stop being made. I don't know what they're going to look like, but I'm not afraid of anything of the industry like coming to some kind of end.
Right.
I do think things are going to keep going.
I'm curious, I mean, just to come back to the beginning, where one of the things I feel like that really links your work is a focus on women, women's experiences in all its kind of complexity and in different stages of life. And, Jennifer, you were talking about this fund for women directors. And just as we come to the close of our conversation, I'm curious what the community looks like for that kind of focus in your work? Not that that's the only focus of your work, but do you have, maybe this brings us back to the therapy session, Kris, that we kind of started at the beginning. Do you have that network? Is there like a robust enough space? Because I could see just what you were saying, Kris, like having people come together to watch a film like Knives and Skin, or to watch, I used to go there and to think about, I used to go here rather, and think about, you know, the kind of experiences that are being explored and in a very authentic way, that there's something so important about sets of communities to make that work even come into the world and then to be kind of experienced in the world. And just wondering where that all is existing for you now, or has been, and how that contributes to your identity as filmmakers.
I mean, I actually feel like I feel a real strong, you know, sort of sisterhood with the sort of, you know, American indie women directors, you know, that Kris and I both know, that I feel like I'm in contact with on a pretty regular basis. I mean, not who, I feel like Kris and I are kind of holding it down for like the entire of the Midwest, you know? And then, you know, I feel like we've both got friends who are, you know, who are either, you know, based in New York or LA, or sort of like a, you know, even maybe a combination of the two. And then some, yeah, Toronto, Atlanta, some other sort of like outlying places, Baltimore even. But I feel like a real, I feel actually really connected to that, to the other, you know, like women directors who are both, you know, kind of authoring their own work, so writing and directing projects that are at a whole range of budgets. You know, some that are still churning out stuff at a really low budget, some that are, you know, lining up to do, you know, Marvel, DC projects, you know, others that are, you know, somewhere in between, the people who are working also between films on, you know, directing TV, etc. And that feels like a real genuine sisterhood, because there's still a real trust gap. I mean, part of that I've experienced, on the one hand, like part of those, you know, going back to what we both were talking about in terms of those general meetings, you know, sometimes I feel like in those meetings, there's still a sense of me saying like, yeah, no, I'm totally capable of, you know, of directing, you know, that script that you sent me. I mean, it was on about like, I was watching a woman talk recently on MSNBC about just the ongoing pay gap, for instance, just in the general kind of industry. And she was saying the reality is that, you know, men often get hired for their potential, and women get hired based on what they've done already, you know? And so I think that the way that so many of us, you know, the sort of female directors have stayed sort of together, supporting each other, is because, you know, we have in our DNA is the understanding that we're all quite capable of doing exactly what we're doing. And that sense of kind of bypassing the system. I always say that I kind of came to the sort of film ministry by like kicking in the basement door, because I didn't go to film school. I went to art school. You know, getting to the sort of house of filmmaking by kicking in the basement window rather is exhausting, you know? So I do think that, you know, the way that, you know, we support each other, we can recommend each other to things, or we can just be there to sort of commiserate, you know, around a certain conversation or a certain sort of person. And I think that right now, if we look at sort of like the bigger picture of like what people like Shonda Rhimes or Ava DuVernay are doing, I mean, you know, it's like, they burned the house down actually, and then said, and here's what we're going to build it back up with, you know? And so, you know, sort of in a very personal way, kind of curating the directors for those shows and sort of amplifying certain underrepresented voices, et cetera. You know, I mean, it really is the case that, I mean, the very first song that gets sung in Knives and Skin is a lullaby version of Our Lips Are Sealed by the Go-Go's. And I wanted to start that film off with the idea that the girls in that film are sort of in that moment saying to each other, like, no one else will help us. That's the reality. So we actually have to help each other. And we are committed in this moment to help each other. It's like a battle cry in a lullaby form. And I feel like that is, you know, that's the sort of sense that I feel in this, you know, community of women. And I feel like, you know, with the recent, you know, passing of the most brilliant Lynn Shelton, you know, it's like, you sort of saw that the kind of this army, you know, of female, you know, directors and writers and producers just sort of like burst through and kind of claim that territory. And so anyway, that was a kind of like a long rant. And I think it's no mistake that, you know, sort of like, it's also not that we're just like Midwestern, you know, or like directors in the Midwest, but we're also, you know, women and moms. And that all gets factored into how sort of easy or hard this filmmaking gig is.
Mm-hmm. Kris, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it's great. I think, like, you know, I will say, like, ever since I started, filmmaking is not like every industry, because it is, at least independent filmmaking, it happens kind of in private, and then it gets released on this sort of international scale. And ever since I started, when I was 25, first going to South by Southwest, there were filmmakers from all over the country. There was Barry Jenkins from San Francisco, and a bunch of people from Austin, and the Safdie brothers from New York, and a bunch of people from LA, and everybody met at these like film festivals and became friends and started a community that spanned which region that you lived in. And I do have friends from all over the country that are doing this. A lot of women, also men, who are, you know, have always, since, you know, in the 15 years since I've been making films, have been supporting each other and checking in on each other, and playing small parts in each other's films and recommending crew. And that is, I would like the Chicago filmmaking community to be stronger, but it is sort of the nature of what it is bigger than just the city that you live in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that was a very beautiful thought to close on. But before you both go, in like literally 2 seconds, give us a recommendation for something we should watch, where, as you said, Kris, everybody's still watching stuff. If it's a woman director, we should know about something recent that you love. Just one recommendation, and then we'll say thank you.
My very good friend Amy Simetz had a film released on the same day as mine, August 9th, called She Dies Tomorrow, which is so fun and scary and good, and everybody should definitely watch that.
Excellent. Jennifer?
The new Brandon Cronenberg film Possessor is one of the best horror films that I've seen perhaps ever. It's really, it's a tough one, but it's utterly brilliant. Possessor.
I love it. 2 horror recommendations to end. A really delightful conversation with both of you. Thank you both, Jennifer Reeder, Kris Rey, for being with us here at
Thank you, Alison.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Chicago Humanities Festival.
Yeah.